We go recording in three, two, and one.
I know I've talked about this. We're gonna dive deep into it, and I've got a playlist with about 100 songs on it, so you should check it out.
I'm not sitting through a 100 song list. Fuck you.
Not for you, not for you.
Welcome to episode 189 of Nerdery Murdering.
Big 189. I'm Zig with your nerdery.
And I'm Jeffrey with the Murdery. Welcome to another week, the highs and lows, and the ups and downs, the good and the bad, and the nerd and the murd. Man, the wind is howling out here
It's
today.
howling up here too.
Jeez. I'm supposed to golf after this, and it's like 22-mile-an-hour winds out there. I don't know. We'll see.
Well, as long as you keep it behind you,
You can't. I mean, the course winds around. Sometimes you're going to have headwinds, sometimes you're going to have tailwinds, sometimes you're going to have a crosswind.
you're gonna hit that ball as hard as you can at 22 miles an hour. It's just gonna stop right in front of you about eye
Probably.
level.
Probably.
Just hover.
22 mile an hour ball is not fast, by the way.
I don't no idea. I know a fastball's like 90 miles an hour, but that's baseball.
Um, fast as a golf ball go. I need to look that
Mm.
up. Let's see.
It
What
can't
is
be that fast. There's not a lot of weight in it.
a golf ball? 242 miles an hour is the maximum
God
velocity.
damn. Yeah, 22 miles an hour is not going to do much.
The average male amateur golfer has a ball speed of 132.6 miles per hour with their driver.
That beats a fastball.
Oh yeah.
That
Yeah.
surprises me because again, it's not so much just the weight. 'Cause it seems like it doesn't have enough weight to get it to go that fast. There's not enough mass behind it. Does that make sense?
So it is the mass behind the hit because you've got different clubs that have different mass on them.
Oh, the club
Um,
mass. Okay. Yeah, I wasn't taking that into account.
well, it's the club mass plus how you hit the ball, and that's not necessarily how fast you hit the ball. Because the one thing that I have discovered when I slow my backswing and do a slow follow through on the ball, I get more accurate um, direction and better distance when it's the adage they tell you all the time. Let the club do the work.
Oh,
Your
okay.
your arms don't do the work. Your club does the work. Let the club do the work, and the club will determine your speed and your distance and everything like that. But yeah, 132. I didn't realize it was that much. 242. That's going to be somebody like Tiger or Rory McIlroy. It's got to be.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, you get hit by a golf ball, you're gonna get hurt. You're gonna
Ouch.
get you're gonna get hurt. So I don't know. We'll see if I get to play today because, like I said, that wind's pretty rough. It knocks you around on the course too. It wears you out. It wears you out getting knocked around like that too. Um. So anyway, we got a good episode today. I've got a long one, so I'm not going to beleaguer anything else. I'm going to go ahead and let Zig take it away on the nerdery side of the house
Excellent. So today we're going to talk about the indie music charts.
because we've never talked about that before.
Well, yeah, but we've never actually dived deep into the charts themselves. And the playlist is incredible because basically I just went with the number one, what they call it alternative airplay now in the United States. They used to call it modern rock tracks.
Hmm.
I've got them all starting from 1988 up, and I want to take it all the way to like Nirvana because that's when the indie music charts really broke open. And I may go beyond that. Um, but I basically wanted to track them week by week.
Hmm.
And in some cases, like one would be at the top one week, and the next one would be at number two, and they'd switch places a couple times. So I only, included them the one time. Um, but right now I'm up to the middle of 1990, and I think I may just keep going. Because I made that YouTube playlist. I wanted to do the first year and a half, and I'm looking at it. I'm like, oh, dude, there's way more songs I need to put in here. So hell, I may go all the way up to 1995. Um, but so the independent music charts, the UK independent singles chart and UK independent album chart are charts of the best-selling independent singles and albums, respectively, in the United Kingdom. Originally published in January of 1980 and widely known as the indie chart, the relevance of the chart dwindled in the 1990s as major label ownership blurred the boundary between independent and major labels. But separate independent charts are currently published weekly by the official charts company. Now, in the wake of punk, post-punk, through the beginning of goth, some stuff like that, small record labels began to spring up as an outlet for artists that were unwilling to sign contracts with major record companies, unwilling or unable in a lot of cases, uh, or were not considered commercially attractive. By 1978, labels like Cherry Red, Rough Trade, and Mute had started up, and support structures soon followed, including independent pressing, distribution, and promotion. These labels got bigger and bigger, and by 1980, they were having the top 10 hits in the UK singles charts. Chart success was limited, however, since the official top 40 was based on sales at large chains and ignored significant sales at the scores of independent record shops that existed. Ian McNay of Cherry Red suggested to the weekly trade paper Record Business the idea of an independent record chart to address the problem. And the first independent chart appeared in 1980, published in Record Business and later licensed to Sounds. The definition of whether or not a single was indie had depended on the distribution channel by which it was shipped. The records needed to be delivered by a distribution service that was independent of the four major record companies in England, i.e., EMI, Sony Music Entertainment, Warner Music Group, and Universal Music Group. In 1981, compilation of the chart switched to research company MRIB, and the chart served to give exposure to the independent labels and artists on those labels. In 1985, the trade publication Music Week started compiling its own indie chart, and both Sound and Melody Maker later switched to the MRIB chart and adopted the Music Week chart instead. Other weekly music papers also published their own charts, often compiled from single record shops. But by 1990, the significance of the chart had been diluted by major record companies forming their own indie labels with independent distribution in order to break new acts via exposure on the indie charts. To be included in the indie chart, a record had to be distributed independently of the corporate framework of the music record companies. The genre of music was irrelevant. Large independent distributors emerged, such as Pinnacle and Spartan, and three later emerged the Cartel, an association of regional distributors, including Rough Trade, Bax, and Red Rhino. The first weekly independent chart was published on the 19th of January, 1980, with Where's Captain Kirk by Spiz Energy topping the singles charts, and Dirk Wears White Socks by Adam and the Ants topping the album charts.
Who's Captain Kirk?
Hmm?
Nothing.
Where's Captain Kirk? I don't
No,
know.
no. I
What?
said
Who
who?
the hell is Dirk?
I
That's
said
what
who's
I want to know.
I said
And
who's
why the
Captain
fuck is
Kirk?
he
I'm
wearing
like,
white socks? My favorite Adam Ant is on that. My favorite Adam Ant song is on that album. It's Never Trust a Man with Egg on His Face. And nobody ever calls that one out. Everybody talks about ant music and everything else, or the Wild Blue Yonder, or the Wild Frontier, but nobody ever talks about Never Trust a Man with Egg on His Face.
mm,
Although the independent charts has less relevance today, the official UK chart company still compiles a chart consisting of those singles from the main chart on independent labels. Um, so that's England. There's a little bit more, but basically they have a distinct chart that tracks indie, and the line's kind of blurred, and we'll get into that a little more. In America, we saw what they were doing over in England, but it took us a little while to figure out how to do it. What we now call alternative airplay, originally known as modern rock tracks, began in 1988, and in 2009, and alternative songs between 2009 and 2020. It's now called alternative airplay. It's a music chart published in the American magazine Billboard since September 10th, 1988, and it ranks the 40 most played songs on alternative and modern rock radio stations, included as modern rock tracks. The chart served as a companion to the mainstream rock chart, then called album rock tracks, and its creation was prompted by the explosion of alternative music on American radio in the late 80s. I would say the explosion didn't really happen until the early 90s, but some of them did break over, and we've talked about that before. Um, Depeche Mode, that's a mainstream act. Well, actually, they were on Sire, so they were independent record. Um, but they were playing on mainstream radio in England, but over here they only played on college radio. Something happened in the late 1980s where they started picking them up and playing them on mainstream radio. And I think it may have had to do with this chart being active, um, because they started to get business. So you got bands like Depeche Mode and The Cure and Susie and the Banshees, which had hardly made a splash over here. Um, and then this alternative airplay, or again at the time, modern rock chart, picked up and they started getting out there, as well as some of the little underground bands that were here that weren't getting a lot of airplay outside of college campuses. Um, due in no small part, I think, to IRS records, because they were like, we'll play at the college level, but we also want to play on the mainstream radio. So they played both sides of the fence, and technically they were independent. During the first several years of the chart, it regularly featured music that did not receive commercial radio airplay anywhere but on a few modern rock and college radio stations. That included many electronic and post-punk artists. Gradually, an alternative rock became more mainstream, spearheaded by the grunge explosion of the early 1990s. Alternative and mainstream rock radio stations began playing many of the same songs. By the late 2000s, the genre became more fully differentiated with only limited crossover. The alternative airplay chart features more alternative rock, indie pop, and pop punk artists, while the mainstream rock chart leans towards more guitar-tinged blues rock, hard rock, and heavy metal. Um, but the chart is based solely on radio airplay ranked by a calculator of the total number of spins each song receives per week. As of 2012, approximately 80 alternative radio stations across the United States are electronically monitored 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, by Nielsen broadcast data systems. The chart has 30 positions when it was introduced in September of 1988 and expanded to 40 positions on September 10th, 1994. The chart was renamed to Alternative Songs beginning with June 20th, 2009, and issued after Bully fully absorbed rock and radio and records, whose similar chart was called Alternative. Billboard introduced the separate Hot Alternative Song chart, which used similar methodology as the Billboard Hot 100, but for songs being played on that list or in college radio. The first alternative chart, called Modern Rock Tracks, appeared on September 10th, 1988 in the United States, 8 years after the English one. The first number one song on that chart was Susie and the Banshees, Peekaboo, which is the first song in our list.
I love that song.
I do too. What a great song. Not my first introduction to Susie and the Banshees, but the first one I really, really was able to vibe with. And then shortly after that, I heard Cities and Dust, and I was like, oh my God, why did they not playing this on the radio?
Cities and Dust is great too.
Yeah,
I love Susie and the Banshees.
yeah. Spellbound, Hyena, there's a lot of cool stuff they did. Um, Kiss Them For Me, love that one. The chart closely associated with college rock, new wave, post-punk, and electronic genres, with a large presence of British, Irish, and Australian artists, as only 24 of the chart's first 82 number one hits were by American acts. Bands included the aforementioned Susie and the Banshees, Depeche Mode, which we mentioned, the Pixies, The Cure, New Order, and REM were the most popular acts. Um, In the United States, several popular songs which were not released as commercial singles did not qualify for the Hot 100 before December of 1998, but performed very well at the modern rock track charts. In 1991, with the release of Smells Like Teen Spirit by Nirvana, which reached number one on November 23rd, 1991, grunge became a new form of alternative rock on the chart. But they didn't completely cross over. Like Black by Pearl Jam peaked at only number 20 on the regular rock tracks or mainstream rock songs, but number 3 on the indie charts. In the mid 1990s, alternative rock songs began to cross over to pop radio with acts such as Green Day, The Offspring, and Alanis Morissette. Soundgarden, Stone Temple Pilots, and the Britpop explosion of Oasis. We also had homegrown bands such as Third Eye Blind, Matchbox 20, and Sugar Ray, plus a bunch of new one-hit wonders. And then you get the new metal rap rock like Korn, Limp Bizkit, Linkin Park, and then garage acts like the White Stripes and the Strokes. And then for a long time, Red Hot Chili Peppers, Foo Fighters, and Incubus would trade places with who had the number one song for a long time. You also had like Nine Inch Nails and Weezer and Jimmy Eat World, Modest Mouse, Fall Out Boy, 30 Second to Mars, The Killers. Uh, the lines started to blur at this point. But also it was weird because they would also pick up they would pick up like a an underground hip hop band like Diggable Planets, which was basically based. It was a crossover between hip hop and jazz. Well, that didn't play on any radio stations except for college radio. Um, I'm Cool Like That. That was a huge hit on college radio. I don't think anybody else heard it. Occasionally you'd hear it in clubs. Um, and some other, unusual acts would end up popping up in there. Flying Lizards, doing their cover of Money, which was a Beatles song, which played in a lot of clubs. The best things in life are free, bum, 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 but you can get them from the birds and beats. I want money. It was so monotone, but you heard that on college radio. They didn't play that on regular radio because they didn't know what to call it. Um, Exclaim magazine began as a discussion among campus and community radio programmers at Ryerson's CKLN FM in 1991 at Ryerson College, and it started by then CKLN programmer Ian Danzig. Together with other programmers, not related, by the way, programmers and Toronto musicians, the goal of the publication was to support great Canadian music that was otherwise going unheard. So even Canada got in on uh, this thing, as well as Australia. The Australian Independent Record Labels Association produced a bit. But I want to start talking about some of the songs that were, let's say, the first year and a half. Again, we talked about Peekaboo by Susie and the Banshees. Just Play Music by Big Audio Dynamite. All That Money Wants by the Psychedelic Furs. Desire by U2. Orange Crush by REM. Charlotte Ann by Julian Cope. Stand by REM. Dirty Boulevard by Lou Reed. I'll Be You by The Replacements. Veronica by Elvis Costello. Mayor of Simpleton by XTC. Fascination Street by The Cure. And So Alive by Love and Rockets.
Uh,
Disappointed.
Lou Reed's coming down here
Lou
for a
Reed's
concert.
dead.
Wait, not Lou Reed, Lou Graham.
Lou Graham.
I was thinking Lou Graham. Lou Graham and is it Lou Graham in Asia?
Foreigner,
It's not Foreigner. It's
because that
not
was the
Foreigner that's
band he
coming.
was with for a long time.
He was with somebody else too. God, I need to look it up because I'm sorry, Lou Reed. It just made me think about that.
It's like Lou Reed's dead.
Lou Graham.
But yeah, I mean that was like the first year, and it was like, man, that list. If you listen to those songs, that's all over the place, and that's why I liked this chart so much because you got all kinds of crazy stuff on there. Um, Channel Z by the B-52s. Comedy Time by Hoodoo Gurus, which we've discussed before.
Hmm.
All of these varied acts, and it wasn't just plinka plink guitars from Britain like the Smiths. It was all sorts of other stuff going as well on these indie charts, and they were just amazing. Now, granted, they still exist today, but it's not the same thing. It wasn't as varied. Okay, I say today. Today, actually, it is pretty varied now, but like through most of the mid 2000s, like 2005 to 2015 or so, that 10 years, it was all 21 Pilots and other stuff like that. And it's like, is it indie music? Well, not really. And it all sounded the same. And that was the whole reason for me getting into the indie music scene to begin with. Because, as I said, I like a lot of good music. I like a lot of soul. I like hip hop. I like this indie stuff. I like punk. I also like a little bit of metal too. And you got to hear some of that. Um, but it wasn't so in the 70s, the 80s, we had this thing called album oriented rock. And basically these DJs played whatever the hell they wanted to, and if it caught on, it'd go around the country as 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 a hit. Well, because of rules with the FCC, one company couldn't own more than one radio station in a market. Those rules changed in the 80s, and you get companies that control basically all of the radio stations in a market. Like two or three companies. So you don't get anything that's independent. They send out lists to their DJs. Hell, they don't even spin the records anymore or CDs. They basically get a hard drive that they plug in, and they're told when to speak over the stuff now. You don't get any of this. Well, college radio is not like that. It's like, oh, hey, I heard this song last week in my friend's car. I'm going to play it for you. That's what indie charts should be, and that's what they were originally. That's why I wanted to track this for the first 10 years of its existence, because I thought it was beautiful and brilliant. Um, but then those same companies ended up buying up the little independent radio stations. Now they can't buy up college radio, because that's part of the education program. So those radio stations are still safe, but your little local indie radio stations like KDGE The Edge or K Rock in Los Angeles or the little one that was on Long Island in New York City, they're getting bought up. Um, and in our case, KDGE went away.
Hmm.
It got bought, it got moved around. It was good for about 4 or 5 years, and then they just took it off the air. And which is a shame because they kicked out George Gamarick, the guy who started it, who basically got to start at an album oriented rock station called KZEW, um, which was probably the greatest radio station that this area ever produced, um, as far as music goes, because they played everything. They had a punk rock show, they had a heavy metal show, they had Dr. Demento, um, and like they would do like a new music show with interviews and stuff. It was incredible. Well, George Gamarick decided to spin his own radio station off of that because he was able to make a deal, and he started KDGE. And for the first year, you could barely hear it. Um, and then they moved it to the broadcast towers up on Broadcast Hill, which is where all of our stuff is because it's the highest point in DFW, and they've got these giant towers on them. Um, and it's basically situated between Tarrant County and Dallas County and Collin County and some of those other areas. There's this big hill, Cockrell Hill, Broadcast Hill, that's not quite a mountain because we don't really have mountains down here. We have big hills. Um, and that's where all of our broadcast stuff comes from, because it hits the whole area. You were able to pick it up a little easier. And then they did really well. And then there was the explosion of grunge and other independent music. And then they got bought out, and George Gamarick was kicked to the curb. Now he's got a few satellite radio shows now that are really, really good, but I kind of miss turning on the edge with him and Alex Luke and some of the other guys just talking about music, just, because they were fans. It's like, hey, yes, like I love the Little River Band because I think they're awesome. But I also like this little weird English band that's only sold 9 records. You should listen to them too. So yeah, go out and check out our YouTube playlist for episode 189 independent music charts because you're gonna get. I just did the tops, the top 10 for. I'm gonna say at least the first 5 years. I may go further. I'm still putting it together because when I originally did it, I wanted to do it with the list that I gave you. So, but now I'm kind of adding to it. So
Cool. Good deal. Yeah, I'm stupid. Lou Graham, not Lou Reed.
it's like
And he
Lou
and
Reed's
he and he
dead.
and he was with Asia at one point. He toured with Asia, and that it doesn't look like that's what was coming. But I swear I heard that ad on the radio the other day. I don't know. Anyway,
Lou
anyway,
Graham.
yeah. No, I know it's Lou Graham that's coming to town. I just thought they said with Asia too. I'd be
Oh
interested.
man, he had a great single on his own back in the mid '80s called "Midnight Blue," which I fucking loved. I had it on
Midnight Blue
vinyl
was
for a
great.
long time. Yeah.
Yeah, Midnight Blue was great. Awesome. All right. Yep. Go listen to that playlist. Appreciate that. With that, we'll step over to the murdery side of the house.
Murder.
And so this is your opportunity, dear listeners, to pause, go to the restroom. This goes into a lot. There's a lot here. It's potentially going to go very long. So if you want to take a pause here real quick, go to your restroom, get something to eat, but you definitely want to stay tuned for all of this. Buckle in, get your notepad ready. I talked to
I'm
Zig
taking
already.
notes.
I told Zig, get your notes ready because there's things I'm gonna point to in here. Um, so yeah, take a pause, take a break, get into it, and we'll be sitting here waiting when you come back. All right, so here we go. Everybody's back, and we're gonna resume to the murdery side of the house.
Murder.
For today, I got my information off Wikipedia. All that's interesting, Crone, ABC 13 News Houston, the FBI website, and Houston Public Media. And I got to give a shout out to he's been featured on a few episodes now. Our listener Paul and yes
What up,
Delaney,
Paul?
yes Delaney, if you're listening, that's your grumpy. Um, Paul recommended this topic to me. Oddly enough, I had not heard of it. Even though I had covered one of the murders here in a previous podcast, I did not connect it with this. And like I said, I recommend taking some notes as you go along in this. This is going to get interesting. This is the Texas killing fields.
Texas killing fields. I'm writing notes down now.
So, oh, and I'll give you keys where to notate some stuff. The Texas Killing Fields is a title used to roughly denote the area surrounding the Interstate Highway 45 corridor southeast of Houston down to Galveston, where since the early 1970s through the early 2000s, more than 30 bodies have been found. The bodies
Oh, it's
along
a
the,
tidewater area. I'm not surprised.
yeah, yes,
Crab beds all over the
yes,
place.
yes, easy to dispose of. The bodies along the corridor were mainly young girls or girls or young women. Furthermore, many additional young girls have disappeared from this area who are still missing. Most of the victims were aged between 12 and 25 years old. Some shared similar physical characteristics, such as similar hairstyles. And despite efforts by the League City, Texas police, along with the assistance of the FBI, very few of these murders have been solved. The area has been described as, quote, a perfect place for killing somebody and getting away with it. After visiting some of the sites of recovered bodies in League City, Amy Kanan Mann, director of the film Texas Killing Fields, commented, quote, you could actually see the refineries that are in the south end of League City. You could see I-45, but if you yelled, no one would necessarily hear you. And if you ran, there wouldn't necessarily be anywhere to go. A task force composed of local law enforcement officials and FBI agents called Operation HALT, which is Homicide Abduction Liaison Team, has been formed to investigate the incidents. Before they were known as the Texas Killing Fields, the 25 acres in League City, Texas were regarded as nothing more than an abandoned oil field where people dumped their trash. Just off of I-45 along the Gulf Coast, the area was desolate and uninteresting place, which changed in 1984, 6 months after a 25-year-old bartender named Heidi Fry went missing. According to the Houston Chronicle, Fi left her parents' house on October 7th, 1983, looking to hitch a ride to Houston to visit her boyfriend. Hitching rides, notate that. There were four murders that were believed to be the work of a single killer, but there were no witnesses and no common link between the women. The FBI and local police couldn't rule out the possibility of multiple murderers either. Moreover, the four bodies found between 1984 and 1981 only represented a fraction of the number of disappearances associated with the stretch of I-45 that quickly became known as America's Highway to Hell. So, what about the others? Here's the list of confirmed or suspected victims. Colette Anise Wilson, who was 13 years old, disappeared from the Alvin bus stop on County Road 99 and Highway 6 in Alvin, Texas, after she was dropped off by her band director on June 17, 1971. She was waiting for her mother, Claire, to pick her up after band practice, and her mother was only 6 minutes late. But in that short amount of time, Colette Wilson vanished.
Wow.
The police weren't worried. Claire later said they said she was probably taking drugs or something, that she'd run away. We knew Colette. We knew that wasn't true, but they wouldn't listen to us. Add runaways to your notes. Her body was found 5 months later on November 26, 1971, near Addicks Reservoir, just 35 yards from the location where the body of Gloria Gonzalez was discovered 4 months later. 14-year-old Brenda K. Jones was last seen while walking to a Galveston hospital close to Interstate 45 on her way to visit her aunt on July 1st, 1971 in Galveston, Texas. Her body was found on July 2nd, 71, floating in nearby Galveston Bay near Pelican Island, close to the Seawolf Parkway and near Interstate 45 the next day. Notate walking alone. Rhonda Renee Johnson, who was 14, and Sharon Lynn Shaw, who was 13, disappeared in Harris County, Texas on the afternoon of August 4th, 1971. Both were last seen walking along Seawall Boulevard in Galveston near a local beach. On January 3rd, 72, two boys fishing in Clear Lake discovered a human skull floating in the water, which they initially believed to be a sports ball. 6 weeks later, searchers discovered the rest of the body, along with that of another girl in a marsh near the lake. And according to a coroner's inquest filed on February 17th, 1972, what?
I know why they're not finding the bodies anymore.
Hmm.
Gators came back.
Well, they're finding bodies still.
They're still finding
Yeah,
bodies.
they're still finding bodies, or they were still finding bodies. So the coroner's inquest, the skull found in the lake was determined by dental records to have belonged to Shaw, and additionally, a crucifix found wrapped around the jawbone of the skull was identified by Shaw's mother as having belonged to her daughter, and the other body found in the marsh was positively identified as Johnson. Gloria Ann Gonzalez, who was 19, was last seen on October 28, 1971, near her apartment on Jacqueline Street in Houston, Texas. Her skeletal remains were found near Addicks Reservoir in the same area as Colette Wilson on November 23rd, 71. Allison Ann Craven, who was 12, was reported as missing by her mother on November 9th, 1971, when she returned to their apartment in Houston near I-45 after completing shopping errands for 1 hour. 3 months later, police found Craven's partial remains in a nearby field, along with two hands and bones from an arm and some teeth. On February 25th, 72, the rest of her skeleton was found in a Pearland, Texas field, also near I-45 and 10 miles from where she was last seen. Debbie Catherine Ackerman and Maria Talbot Johnson, who were both 15, were last seen attempting to hitchhike, again, hitchhikers, to Houston, Texas, near an island ice cream shop in Galveston, Texas on November 15th, 71. Witnesses reported seeing a man in a white van stopping by the curbside and picking up the girls after agreeing to drive them to Houston. Their bodies were found bound and partially nude in Turner's Bayou on November 17th, 71, near Texas City. 16-year-old Kimberly Ray Pitchford was last seen at Dobie High School in Houston, Texas, while she was there for a driving test on January 3rd, 73. Her body was found by two teenage boys two days later in a ditch in Angleton, Texas, around noon on County Road 65 in Brazoria County on January 5th, 1973. 12-year-old Brooks Bracewell and 14-year-old Georgia Caroline Gear were both last seen at the Totem convenience store off I-45 on September 6, 1974. Keep note of convenience store.
You totems.
Uh-huh. At the time of their disappearance, police insisted that Bracewell and Gear were runaways, only beginning to investigate foul play in 81. Again, runaways. Police are always saying the runaways.
Hmm.
In 1976, partial skeleton remains belonging to Bracewell were found by police in a culvert in Alvin, Texas, nearby the pair's last known location, but were not connected to Bracewell and Gear at the time, and were only identified as Bracewell after a new detective took over the case in 81. The ditch where they were originally found was re-examined on April 3rd, 81, and more remains were found, as well as the fragments of a gold sweater and plaid pants. 12-year-old Suzanne Bowers was last seen walking along a 3-minute route between her grandmother's house at the 4000 block of Avenue S and her own home at the 3100 block of Avenue P around 10:45 a.m. on May 21st, 1977 in Galveston. The seventh grader was going home to get her swimsuit to go to the beach. Her skeletal remains were found 2 years later in Alta Loma, Texas on March 25th, 1979.
I'm looking at the map. He's
Uh-huh.
hunting, he's disposing of them all around Brazoria National Wildlife Refuge.
Hold your thoughts on the word he.
Oh, okay.
Hold your thoughts on that.
This person is
Oh, no, no,
all these
no, no.
towns circle Brazoria National Wildlife Refuge.
Oh, no, no, no. He is correct. Singular he. Hold on to that.
Oh, okay.
This may be a name you're familiar with, or names you're familiar with. Tina Gale Klaus, who was 17, and Harold Dean Klaus Jr., 21, were found January 22nd in 1981 in northern Harris County in a boggy wooded area just north of the Houston city
The
limits.
Klauses, I remember that.
Yep. If you want more on that murder, go back to episode 154, where I covered this one in detail. This is the one that I didn't realize was a part of this. A civilian's dog was let to wander in the woods and return to its owner with a decomposing human arm.
Oh, God
Search,
damn it.
search,
That's the worst game of fetch
I
ever.
know. Search parties prompted by the dog's discovery subsequently found the heavily decomposed bodies of the Klaus couple near Wallaceville Road. Despite significant decomposition, it was determined that both were victims of homicide. Excuse me, Tina had been strangled and Harold had been bound and gagged before beaten to death. In 2021, forensic genealogists positively identified Dean and Tina, and in 2022, their daughter Holly Marie was located alive in Oklahoma. Again, episode 154. Go back and listen to that one. So sorry. 15-year-old Michelle Angela Garvey went missing from New London, Connecticut, presumably after running away from home on June 1st, 1982, at the age of 14. Her body was found on July 1st, 1982, in Baytown, Texas, 1 month after she went missing. The cause of death of the victim was determined to be strangulation, and there was evidence that Michelle had been sexually assaulted. Her body was found wearing brown clothing, including a long sleeve button down shirt with a distinct horse embroidery on the breast pocket. The body was disposed of in a field after she died, possibly hours after her murder. She was buried near two other unidentified murder victims found in 1981, who were identified in 2021 as Dean and Tina Klaus. Garvey was identified in January of 2014 through the efforts of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children and the Harris County Police Department, who had contacted her family and obtained samples of DNA for testing in August 2013. Susan Lee Eads, 20 years old, was a cocktail waitress who left her family home in Harris County, Texas at around 4:30 p.m. on August 30th, 1983 to her workplace. Keep note of working in a bar. The following day, a motorist discovered her body a few miles from her home. She was naked and had bruises on her back and face. Susan had been strangled to death with the bodysuit she was wearing, which had been used as a tourniquet. Her car was found parked adjacent to a vacant lot where she was found. An autopsy determined she had been sexually assaulted. She was last seen at a local club with a white man wearing a cowboy hat. I know it's Texas. Keep note of the cowboy hat.
Cowboy hat. White
Her
dude with a cowboy hat.
Her mother received phone calls from an unidentified man who claimed to have photos of her daughter. He referred to himself as Bill and that he lived in Houston, Texas. Keep note of Bill.
Hold on.
Um, I know I've got a lot here.
Oh, hold on. Bill in Houston. Oh, and also for our fans, uh, as he's talking for the people who don't live around here. So he's talking about all around, basically, Houston metropolitan area is gigantic.
Yes,
Um, Baytown to the east, um, and most of the places he's talking about are to the south of Houston, like Pearland and Angleton and League
League
City.
City.
Yeah, and
Um,
Harris County is the county that Houston is in. So
Houston is larger than the city of New York.
yeah,
It's huge,
yeah.
huge. There was a DNA profile extracted from Eads' body, and it was matched to Arthur Raymond Davis Jr., who was a Vietnam War veteran and boat captain. He died on January 16th, 1984, after a single vehicle accident. I didn't ever see that he was listed as a suspect.
Arthur Davis Jr. I'm writing it down anyway.
I don't worry about him. We're not going to
Oh,
talk about him again. The DNA profile was matched to him, but it was never said if he was ever considered a suspect or not.
oh, maybe it was they just had a tryst or something.
hmm So we mentioned this person earlier, Heidi Marie Villarreal Fye, who was called Heidi by her family. She was
Mhm.
25. She was a cocktail waitress last seen on October 10th, 1983, at a convenience store located off West Main Street in Hobbs in League City, Texas. Once again, a cocktail waitress at another convenience store, but not the same convenience store as earlier. This is actually the Express Lane in League City.
In League City,
She worked at the Texas Moon Bar. Um, do remember the Texas Moon Bar.
Texas Moon
On
Bar.
on April 4th, 1984, Healy's remains were discovered after a dog brought her skull to a nearby house in Calder Field on the 3000 block of Calder Road near League City, Texas. Calder Road is very prominent in this story. Sandra K. Ramber, who was 14, was last seen by her family's home in Santa Fe, Texas, on October 26, 1983. She was determined to be missing due to the fact that the front door was left open, food was in the oven, and her purse and coat were still in the house. Initially, she was believed to have gone to the store for a moment, but she never returned. She's never been found. Laura Ann Miller, who was 16, was last seen on September 10th, 1984, at the same convenience store as Heidi Fye was last seen a year earlier in League City, Texas, using a payphone to call her boyfriend. This is the express lane again. Her remains were found on February 2nd, 1986, 60 feet away from where police had found Heidi Fye the year before.
Yeah, I'm
El-
looking at Calder Drive right now. It's right off of 45 or the Gulf Freeway.
yep.
Oh, Clear Creek, which is high moving,
hmm
and there's a oh my God, they got a couple of other creeks here.
hmm
I'm sorry, I'm just looking at the lake
Oh,
and
yeah.
yeah, Clear Lake. Oh yeah, yeah.
Yep.
Oh yeah, okay, that makes sense. I'm sorry.
No worries. Ellen Ray Simpson Beeson, who was 29, was last seen by friends on July 29th, 1985, at the Texas Moon Club in League City, Texas, where she met local construction worker Clyde Hedrick. There's again the Texas Moon Club. Later
Mhm.
that evening, she told her friends that she and Hedrick had made plans to go swimming. Her decomposed remains were discovered underneath a sofa in a wooded area beside Old Causeway Road in Galveston County. The medical examiner was unable to determine the cause at that time, but upon exhumation of her remains in 2012, it was ruled that she had suffered several severe skull fractures. Uh, Clyde Hedrick, you can remember him.
Clyde Hedrick.
Clyde Hedrick. Michelle Doherty Thomas, who was 17, was last seen leaving her family residence in Santa Fe, Texas on October 5th, 1985, after having returned from work at a Galveston, Texas gas station. She left to meet with friends at a nearby nightclub located in Galveston Island later that evening. Acquaintances claimed she had stopped at a convenience store on the way to the nightclub, and Michelle had gotten into a vehicle with two men, another convenience store disappearance. I'm really curious if she had gotten into the vehicle after seeing them at the nightclub, but she has not been seen since, Authorities believe she may have been abducted and murdered. 30-year-old Audrey Lee Cook was last heard from in late December of 1985. Her remains were found in a field off the 3000 block of Calder Road on the same day as the body of Laura Miller that was located nearby. The victims' bodies were not buried, but rather hidden from view. Both were left in a supine position near a tree. Cook had a small caliber gunshot wound to the back, severing her spine, and she had suffered additional injuries to her ribs. She was identified in April of 2019, along with Donna Prudhomme, by family tree DNA using genetic genealogy. Shelley Kathleen Sykes, who was 19, was last seen leaving her job as a waitress at Guido's Seafood Restaurant on the beachfront in Galveston, Texas, just prior to 12 a.m. on May 24th, 1986. She wasn't a cocktail waitress, but a waitress nonetheless. Her car was found the next day stuck in mud, bloodstained, and abandoned on the side of I-45 access road south of the Galveston Causeway. The driver's side window had been broken and bloodstains were discovered on the door and driver's seat. Sykes' body has never been found, but John Robert King and Gerald Peter Swarst have been charged and convicted of her murder.
Okay.
Suzanne Renee Richardson, 22, was employed as a night clerk at Casa del Mar condominiums on Seawall Boulevard in Galveston, Texas. She was last seen at work at 6 a.m. on October 7, 1988, by resort security guards. And shortly afterwards, another employee who was sleeping in the room above Richardson's office heard a loud female scream. The witness claimed to have then heard a car door slam shut, accompanied by another scream and the sound of a car speeding away from the parking lot. A guest arrived at Richardson's office to check out around 6:30 a.m. and discovered that the desk was abandoned. Donna Marie Prudhomme, we talked about her earlier, who was 34, was last seen July 91 in Nassau Bay, Texas. On September 8th, 1991, a local resident came across her badly decomposed body in a field beside Calder Road. A medical examination concluded that she had died at least 6 weeks prior, yet a cause of death could not be determined. She was identified in April 2019 along with Audrey Cook by family tree DNA using genetic genealogy, as we talked about.
Oh, Calder Road runs from Santa Fe all the way up into League City
It's
in
big.
Nassau Bay.
It's big. Yeah.
Yeah.
14-year-old Lynette Bibb and 15-year-old Tamara Fisher disappeared on February 1st, 1996, after visiting a Houston, Texas club for teenagers, another nightclub. A 22-year-old male later claimed to have dropped the friends off at a motel near the city center on Old Spanish Trail. The bodies of the two girls were found dumped by a rural road 2 days later on February 3rd, 1996, in Cleveland, Texas.
Cleveland's pretty far out.
Yeah. Crystal Bean Jean Baker, who was 13, was last seen near the I-45 on March 5th, 96 in Texas City, leaving her grandmother's house for a convenience store to use the phone after an argument. Another
Hmm.
convenience store. Crystal was last seen using a phone at a local convenience store to ask her friend if she could stay with her. 2 hours later, her body was found. She had been raped, strangled, and dumped over the I-10 Trinity River Bridge. Interesting, her great aunt was Marilyn Monroe.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
Kevin Edison Smith was convicted of capital murder in her death in 2012 and sentenced to life in prison. And in 2019, Governor Greg Abbott signed into law the Crystal Jean Baker Act, which permits the collection of DNA from individuals arrested for certain felonies prior to conviction. Yay, something good Greg Abbott has done. I don't know what else good he's
Oh,
done.
yeah. Hot Wheels. I hate that dude. You know, we don't ever, even the governors we like, we don't have nice names for them.
No, it's true.
I mean,
12-year-old Laura Smither was last seen in Friendswood, Texas, jogging down her home street on April 3rd, 97, after telling her mother she was going on a 20-minute run.
good God, 97.
Uh-huh.
These guys are hunting almost 30 years at this point.
Mm-hmm. 17 days later, on April 20th, 97, her body was found in a retention pond in Pasadena, Texas. In 98, her parents established the Laura Recovery Center, a nonprofit organization that aids the search for and recovery of kidnapping victims. William Lewis Reese was convicted of the murders of Laura Smither, Kelly Cox, and Jessica Kane in June of 2022. We're about to talk about both of those.
Okay.
Kellyanne Cox, 20, was last seen July 15th, 1997, in a Conoco gas station and convenience store in Denton, Texas, after locking herself out of her car, making a call to her boyfriend for help using the station's outdoor payphone. It's very interesting the number of people that were last seen at payphones.
Wait, did you say Denton?
Yep, she was abducted in Denton.
Denton, like up here, Denton.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
All right.
Um, Over 18 years later, on March 18th, 2016, Kelly's remains were discovered after suspected serial killer William Lewis Reese directed investigators to search an area in Brazoria County, Texas, where her remains were found. Reese confessed to and was convicted to the murders of Laura Smither, Kelly Cox, Jessica Kane in June of 2022. Jessica Lee Kane, who was 17, was last seen at the Bennigan's restaurant near Baybrook Mall in Clear Lake, Texas, dining with friends around 1:30 a.m. She was reported missing on August 17th, 97, when her father found her truck abandoned along I-45. On March 18th, 2016, Jessica's remains were finally found in a field off East Orem Road next to Hobby Airport. And again,
That's South
su
Houston.
mhm, suspected serial killer Lewis Reese directed investigators to search the area where her remains were found, and he was convicted. Tot Tran Harriman, who was 57, this is kind of the outlier because of the age, was visiting relatives in Texas and had mapped out a route between League City and Corpus Christi, Texas, and planned to drive along Highway 35. She departed approximately 5 o'clock a.m. on July 12th, 2001, from her son's residence near League City, and she was last driving her 95 Lincoln Continental along Highway 35, which she's never been found. Sarah Ann Lewis Trusty, who was 23, was last seen during the evening hours during the day in Algoa, Texas, near her church, riding her bicycle around 11 p.m. on July 12th, 2002. Her body was discovered on July 28th, 2002, in a dike in Texas City in a nearby reservoir by fishermen. And the last known victim I have here is Teresa Lynn Vanegas, who was 16, who was last seen in Dickinson, Texas, walking near the Green Case subdivision on October 31st, 2006. 3 days later, her body was found strangled, raped, and with her hair cut off in a field across from Dickinson High School. So those are the list of known possible victims, and there's a lot of commonalities in them.
Hmm.
Um, and I'll get back to that. Let's go to the list of suspects. Michael Lloyd Self in 1972, a gas station operator and convicted sex offender from Galveston. Michael Lloyd Self became a suspect in the murders of Rhonda Johnson and Sharon Shaw. After hours of interrogation, Self confessed to the murders. He was taken to the district prison, later aiding with locating the bodies. In the following months, he retracted his confession, claiming that he had been tortured into confessing, with the interrogator suffocating with a plastic bag, burning him with cigarette butts and a radiator, as well as being assaulted by Police Chief Don Morris. Nevertheless, on September 18th, 1974, Self was convicted of the killing of Shaw and received a life imprisonment term, despite the fact that his confession showed great discrepancies concerning the victim's clothing, the date of the murders, the location of the body, how they were killed, and various other details. 3 years later, in 76, Don Morris and his deputy, Tommy Deal, were arrested and convicted of various crimes, including torture and other misconduct against detainees. Morris did get sentenced to 55 years in prison, while Deal to 30. After this, Self regularly applied for an appeal but was rejected every time. He ended up dying on December 21st, 2000, still in custody. And it was only after his death that a number of police officials, including former Harris County District Attorney, stated their belief that Self was wrongly convicted. Edward Harold Bell, an investigation by the League City Police and FBI in the 1970s, identified another local resident, Edward Harold Bell, who was a known exhibitionist and a suspect. He had been arrested at least 12 times on charges of showing his genitals to children, but each time avoided imprisonment. Bell lived on a property near the beach in Galveston where he was a silent partner of a surf shop, and he even knew two of the victims, Debbie Ackerman and Maria Johnson, who frequented the store. In the mid 1970s, he acquired a plot of land in Dickinson and lived near the place where two more victims, Brooks Bracewell and Georgia Gear, were last seen alive. In 1978, while masturbating on the street in front of a group of teenage girls, Bell was confronted by the 26-year-old former Marine Larry Dickens. As his mother called the police, Dickens removed the keys from Bell's vehicle and refused to return them. In retaliation, Bell killed him and fled, but was subsequently apprehended by police. He posted bail several weeks later, and in order to avoid conviction and further incarceration, he fled Texas and escaped from the United States, evading police for more than 2 decades.
Wait a
In that,
minute.
Mhm.
Dickinson. Where at in Dickinson? Did they say where his place was
uh,
in Dickinson?
it was near where two of the victims were, which was near Dickinson High School, if I recall correctly.
That's not that far from Calder Road, dude.
No, it's not. No.
You're talking maybe 4 or 5 miles?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah.
In 93, he was arrested in Panama and extradited back to the United States, where he was subsequently convicted of Dickens' murder and received a 70-year sentence. In 98, Bell wrote several letters to the Harris County attorney confessing to the murders of 5 girls in 71 and 6 more between 74 and 77. He stated he did not remember the names of most of his victims, but confidently stated that he had killed Debbie Ackerman, Maria Johnson, Colette Wilson, and Kimberly Pitchford, as well as 2 other girls whom he had abducted from Webster in August of 71, later identified as Rhonda Johnson and Sharon Shaw. He called the girls the 11 who went to heaven. Despite this, Bell was never charged with these murders since no evidence, biological or otherwise, incriminated him, and he remained a prime suspect until his death in April of 2019. Before he died, however, Bell did claim he was a victim of a brainwashing program that forced him to kill. Mark Stallings. In 2013, Mark Roland Stallings, a convicted kidnapper, was serving a life term, confessed to killing a girl, later identified as Donna Prudhomme, in 91, dumping her body in the Calder Field. At the time of the murder, Stallings was living and working in League City near the homes of some girls who went missing or were subsequently found dead. And despite the fact that his testimony showed great consistency with details, he has not been charged with any of the murders, but remains a suspect in the murders of Donna Prudhomme and Audrey Cook, as well as 2 unrelated murders in Fort Bend County. Clyde Edwin Hedrick. We're coming back to him. So
Clyde Hedrick. I have him in my notes here.
Clyde Hedrick was named as a suspect in the 2022 documentary Netflix series Crime Scene: The Killing Fields. I did see this. This was very good. Hedrick met his ex-wife at Texas Moon
Texas Moon Bar.
and
Also in
off
my notes.
and often wore
A cowboy hat.
a black cowboy hat.
Oh, it was a
He,
white dude with a cowboy hat, with a black
yep,
cowboy hat. Okay, yeah, yeah.
yep. He thought himself a ladies' man and often went to pick up women in bars. Hedrick was released from jail in 2021 after he was sentenced to 20 years in prison for the murder of Ellen Beeson in 1984. Remember, she was seen leaving with him.
Yeah.
In November of 2011, Hedrick's ex-wife told authorities that he had told her that Ellen's death was the result of a drug deal gone bad. He started choking Ellen and pushed her under the water. He then had sex with Ellen after she died and hid her body under the causeway. What is the fascination of sex after death? What is it? What is it? What is it? What is it?
Yeah.
I can't get there. I can't make the
You
leap.
know,
I
yeah,
can't get there.
yeah.
Um,
I,
He- I know. Hedrick's ex-wife said that Hedrick threatened her with similar if she ever said anything. Ellen Beeson's body was exhumed in March of 2012, and medical examiners determined she had received a massive head wound, which was what caused her death. I talked about that earlier. Hedrick ended up only serving 8 years and got early release parole due to a technicality in Texas law. There is a long ago revised Texas law that allowed offenders to be released early when time served for good behavior and other factors were factored against the time they were sentenced to serve. The law was revised in 1987 to exclude the most violent offenders. Um,
But he
It
got convicted before
he got
87.
convicted before it, and his conviction stemmed from the 84 killing, so he was eligible for and granted release. Following his release, Hedrick has been living in a halfway house, and in July 2012, Tim Miller, who was the father of Laura Miller and founder of Texas EquiSearch, I want to talk about that one in a minute, won more than 24 million in liability and damages after filing a 2014 wrongful death suit against Hedrick, who was his former neighbor. Um,
I mean, I get filing the lawsuit, but you're not going to get anything
oh,
out
he
of it.
no, and it was more point. It was more point than
Yeah,
anything else. I feel bad for Tim Miller. I feel real bad for Tim Miller. He has dedicated his life to nothing more than finding for sure who his daughter's killer was. And
yeah.
he went through multiple things. He founded that Texas EquiSearch, which is awesome. He does it for free.
Uh-huh.
People call him up and they need to do searches through waters or on horseback or whatever. And he does it 100% for free. He doesn't charge anybody a dime for what he
Yeah.
does, but he
And
has spent
honestly,
his
going
life.
where they're going, horses are the best way to travel.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
because it's either that or fan boats, and the problem with fan boats is they really disturb things.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, the you it just stirs up the water, even though they don't sit very low in it. The fan itself kicks up a bunch of shit.
But
So
I felt very after watching the crime documentary, I felt very bad for Tim Miller. I really, really did. Um, it, Hedrick was found civilly liable for Laura Miller's death, but he was never criminally charged. Hedrick did have a previous criminal record that included charges of trespassing, theft, abuse of a corpse, attempted arson, possession of marijuana, driving while intoxicated, and sexual assault. He allegedly made a jailhouse confession to a jailhouse informant to murdering Laura Miller and Heidi Fye. The informant claimed that Hedrick raped Laura before he murdered her. And even though it was a prison informant, they still have to have evidence.
yeah, yeah,
That
corroborating
just
evidence.
right. That just gets
Yeah,
them on their path. So
yeah.
William Lewis Reese, who we talked about earlier in 2015, he was linked via DNA to the 97 cold case murder of a woman in Oklahoma, for which he was subsequently convicted and sentenced to death. Not long after that, he confessed to 3 murders associated with the Texas killing fields, for which he was convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment in 2022. I had you note Bill earlier. I wonder if this is the Bill from Susan Eads' murder.
Bill in Houston.
Yeah, I'm
Bill, I
wondering
live in
if this was
Houston.
him.
Yeah.
Robert Abel. You're not going to like this one.
Okay.
Robert Abel owned a portion of Calder's Field and had a horse riding business there. Um, Tim Miller, who I'd talked about before, as well as others in Texas City, constantly pressured him to allow excavation of his land for nothing more than he owned the land.
Hmm.
The locals, including Tim Miller in League City, convicted him in their mind, and it
Hmm.
caused him so much grief he ended up selling his business and moving away. It continued to haunt him, and in July 2005, he drove his golf cart onto some train tracks and was killed by a train.
Ah,
There's no evidence whether this was an accident or suicide, and he was considered a suspect all the way up to his death. Most no longer consider Robert Abel a suspect. I thought that one was really kind of sad.
yeah. He just didn't want people digging up his field. I
Yeah,
get it. I
yeah,
wouldn't want people digging up my field either. But I mean, if they're looking for
I know.
the bodies of their children, yeah, go ahead and fucking dig it up.
Yeah.
Be gone. Do what you got. Just put it back the way you found it when you're done. Maybe
Um,
plant a tree or two.
so we had talked about these a little bit. These were the actual convictions. The Ellen Beeson case. Clyde Edwin Hedrick was brought in for questioning in '85 in relation to her suspicious death. He admitted that both of them had gone swimming in a nearby lake upon leaving a local bar, the Texas Moon. But he further stated that she had accidentally drowned while in water. He then claimed to have disposed her body out of fear of being accused of foul play. At the time, since her death could not be ascertained in '96, Hedrick was convicted of abusing her corpse and was sentenced to a year in jail. In 2011, that's when Hedrick's ex-wife approached authorities and said that Hedrick had frequently made incriminating remarks regarding Beeson's death. This information, along with Beeson's second autopsy, resulted in authorities getting an arrest warrant and charging Clyde with murder in 2014. He was convicted of involuntary manslaughter and released from a stale Supermax penitentiary in Huntsville, Texas in October of 2021. The Shelley Sykes case in 87, 30-year-old John Robert King phoned the El Paso police claiming that on May 24th, 1986, he, together with 33-year-old Gerald Peter Zwarst, attacked Shelley Sykes while she was in her car, after which the girl was raped and strangled. After his arrest, Zwarst told police that he had hidden the body in one of the fields where the other bodies were found. Both men were asked to indicate the whereabouts of Sykes' body in exchange for avoiding life sentences, but their directions failed to uncover it. King and Zwarst were convicted of aggravated kidnapping and received life imprisonments in 1998. They were also probed for other such crimes committed during the mid 1980s, but both vehemently denied any involvement. King died from natural causes behind bars in 2015, October 2015, while Zwarst died in prison in November of 2020. The Crystal Jean Baker case in April 2012, 16 years after Crystal Jean Baker's beaten, raped, and strangled body was found, Kevin Edison Smith was arrested and convicted of murdering her. In 2009, Smith had been arrested on a drug charge in Louisiana, and about the same time, a detective tested Baker's dress for DNA. A match was confirmed using advanced technology that was not available during the time of Crystal's disappearance, and a jury deliberated for about 30 minutes and found Smith guilty, and he was sentenced to life in prison.
For our fans out there, where they're at in south of Houston, Louisiana is only about an hour away by car.
Yep.
Yeah, that's the way we go to hang out with my dad down through that area. Beautiful too, and swampy.
The Jessica Lee Kane and Kellyanne Cox case in May of 97, William Lewis Reese was arrested for the kidnapping and attempted murder of 19-year-old Sandra Sapaw from Webster. The 19-year-old Sandra was pregnant with her third child. She threw herself out of a truck speeding down I-45. A woman in the car behind her pulled over and took Sandra to a nearby hospital. Sandra tried to recall the events of the night, but her memory was foggy. She had been at a gas station.
Mhm.
Her tire had been slashed, and there had been a man who offered to help, but then he brandished a knife and forced her into his truck. She could remember the events, but not the details. She couldn't even identify who the man was until several months later when police tried to stir her memory with hypnosis. At that point, she was able to recall the truck's license plate number. The truck belonged to a man named Bill Reese, a convicted
Bill
rapist who left his
in
home in
Houston.
Oklahoma to start life anew in southern Texas. The following year, he was found guilty and convicted, receiving a 60-year imprisonment term. After his conviction for kidnapping and rape, Reese was transferred to the Ellis unit to serve his sentence. And in the early 2000s, he was compelled by law to submit DNA samples to be entered into CODIS. And in 2015, his DNA was matched to the killer of 19-year-old Tiffany Johnson, who was found murdered in Oklahoma in 97. And it was after this revelation that Reese confessed to killing Jessica Lee Kane and Kellyanne Cox, leading the investigators to the bodies' burial sites. He had been suspected of kidnapping and killing Laura Smither, and confessed to friends with police in 2016 that he had murdered her. In 2021, Reese was convicted of Johnson's murder and sentenced to death. The following year, he was extradited to Texas and was convicted of the murders of Smither, Kane, and Cox, receiving a life term after pleading guilty to the three murders. And it's always possible he could be extradited to Oklahoma again, though if he is, he likely will be executed.
You're gonna serve life in prison down here, but in case you get out, they're gonna kill you in Oklahoma.
Mm-hmm.
Damn.
A film adaptation of the deadly events that occurred along the I-45 highway was released on September 9th, 2011, with the title Texas Killing Fields. I had mentioned her earlier. It was directed by Amy Kanan Mann and starred Sam Worthington and Jeffrey Dean Morgan. The film is loosely based on the murders while depicting a fictional portrayal of the struggle that local police faced while attempting to solve the murders. The film focuses on the lead police detectives, Captain Brian Goetzius and Mike Land, who dedicated their careers to solving the mysteries of of Interstate Highway 45. The filmmakers hired officers Goetzius and Land as consultants while making the movie. Janet Miller, the mother of victim Laura Miller, said in an interview with the Dallas Morning News that she was angry at first about the film, stating, quote, "I was upset because no one notified me. The parents should know what's going on."
Yeah.
Tim Miller, who we talked about earlier, who's Laura's father, said he saw the film for what filmmakers intended to raise awareness about the crimes and generate new tips. In an interview with CBS News for 48 Hours, actor Sam Worthington said, quote, people you never know might just go and see the movie and go, oh, I remember when someone went down in the fields and I remember a certain car and a certain person seemed a bit dodgy. Maybe a family can then know what happened to their daughter.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of people down there too. A
Yep.
lot of people. That's a
Yes, there
that's a
is.
big, heavily populated area.
Well, the three-part miniseries Crime Scene: The Texas Killing Fields was released on Netflix in December of 2022, directed by Jessica Dimmock. It was rated the top series docu-series on Netflix with 23 million total hours viewed, and received positive reviews. I highly recommend this documentary. I watched it. It was very, very good. The area around the Calder Fields has developed considerably since the 80s and 90s. It now has a paved road and is across the street from a housing development. A local church owns the land, and church and community members have created a peaceful memorial to the four women found there. Each woman has her own marker decorated with their photos, names, and mementos. Um, Presently, there's a lot about these cases that remains unsolved. Police and the FBI were able to identify some of the people responsible for the murders that took place near the Texas killing fields. The question of who killed the four girls between 83 and 91, though, is no closer to being answered today than it was at the time. It's extremely rare to have two or more serial killers in the same proximity. However,
It
this kind
looks
of,
like we had five or six.
yeah, this seems to be the case. We've got multiple people involved all around the same stretch of land and many unsolved cases. The area at the time this was happening was a boom town for
Hmm
work in the oil fields and construction.
hmm
So
They were building up Houston.
it kind of made me wonder, was this a bunch of people that were just living on the edge that were able to get quick work with little to no background checks? And were
Mhm.
these all workers who discovered each other's lust for murder and corroborated?
Yeah, so you're thinking maybe like a group of people who started working in the oil fields and stuff and just
Or in construction?
or yeah, or in construction and just figured out, hey, we can rape and pillage our way all through here and nobody will say anything.
Yeah, it was easy to dispose of the bodies
Yeah.
and
Well, and back then, up until what, 30 years ago, this area was largely untouched.
hmm
You know,
hmm
there's a big wetland in the middle, it's surrounded by these towns. There's a
yep,
there's a national wetland area.
yep. I mean, I wondered, did they all work together to plan out
Hmm
their next attack or attacks? We've got women and girls who worked in bars or were last seen in bars, women
hmm
whose last known location was a convenience store, women who were hitchhiking or walking alone on roads. This many women, all in this area,
hmm
all these different people. The attacks and the murders were very similar in their MO. Using this area to dump them off.
Yeah,
I
it's
I
all southeast of Houston too.
I
It's all in that
really
area.
I really think all these people potentially knew each other.
Yeah,
All the people who committed these crimes potentially knew each other and talked about this and planned this.
yeah, because nobody you spoke about came from north of the loop. It's all south
Nope.
and east of the loop.
Yep.
I a couple places west. You talked about Angleton is
Mm-hmm.
west, but
Mm-hmm.
it's still south.
Yep.
Lake Jackson, southwest.
Yep.
Liverpool, Alvin, Algoa, Santa Fe,
Mm-hmm.
Dickinson, League City. Yeah, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Between Galveston and Houston, that area used to be beach bars.
Yeah.
Beach bars and oil refineries and places where guys would fish.
Yes. It's it's a very strange case.
Hmm
It's a very strange case, and so much of it is unsolved. Um, the police and FBI still get calls to this day concerning this case because it's still open.
Yeah.
Um, in the documentary, they featured Special Agent Richard Renison of the FBI. Um, these are the only cold cases he's ever worked that remain unsolved. He's closing in on retirement age, and he talks about that he wants to bring closure to these cases for both the families and the victims. He said, quote, anything anyone in the public knows, no matter how small they think it is, we really want them to come forward because it may be very significant to us. And we've talked about that before. If you see something, say something. If you know
See something, say
something, say
something.
something, no matter how small. If you have any information on these cases, you can visit tips.fbi.gov or call your local FBI field office. Like I said, they get tips and calls on this all the time. It's a very open case. I don't think they have caught everybody that was associated with this. I think
I'm
we
glad they
still have
caught
some
some of
people.
them.
They've caught some. We have some killers who either A are still running free or died without justice being served. Um,
Died before they could catch them.
yeah, but that's the story of the Texas killing fields.
Thank you for that, sir. I also had a thought too. So in the 70s, alligators were still endangered.
Hmm.
Since then, because of breeding programs and re-releasing them, alligators have returned to that area. That may be one of the reasons why, hey, we put the bodies here. Well, they're not here, they're way over there.
That's possible,
Because
and
alligators have
sure,
returned to the area
sure,
in that time.
sure, and why some of them have never been found.
Yeah.
Um, it's
Yeah, because a big enough alligator can eat bone.
uh yeah, um, just wild. You do realize that as this was going on,
Mhm.
we also had Dean Corll down in
Dean
Houston
Coral.
at
Yeah,
the
I was
same
thinking the same
time.
thing. Yeah, but Dean Coral, wasn't he more North Houston?
He was
Okay.
North Houston, but
Like Conroe
but
and
just think about it.
yeah.
All these serial killers in the same area.
Yeah.
Um, that is so rare.
Yeah. And you got and so from North Houston to Galveston, what's that? A total like 100 miles?
Probably.
Yeah. And yes, it's densely populated now. It was fairly densely populated then. But yeah, from Conroe to Galveston, maybe 80 to 100 miles. And then, a big circle around it. That's a lot of serial killers for
Well, in Dean
that
Corll,
area.
I'd have to go back and look for sure, and I could be wrong. I think he was guilty of at least a dozen to 20 murders.
Yeah.
It was a lot. It was a lot
Yeah.
for Dean Corll. Um, and then you've got 30 plus down in this area, the Texas killing fields. That's just wild. Wild, wild, wild.
Man, Houston
Um,
makes people crazy. That's what it is.
maybe
It's the traffic.
it makes me crazy when I go down to Houston. I avoid Houston where I can. So yeah, that's my story for this week. Like I said, I thought this was fascinating,
Yeah.
absolutely
Yeah,
fascinating,
it's
and
crazy.
just wild how much was in there. And I think you see why I wanted you to keep notes on some
Yeah.
certain things because it was all going to come back later on,
Yeah.
and
Oh,
just
you circled right back to it. I was like, oh, Clyde. White
just
dude in a black hat.
yeah. Um, the Clyde Hedrick one is pretty wild. On the Netflix documentary, um, his stepdaughter was on there and talked about um, Clyde was sexually abusive to her as a child as well. And it's I don't know. This case was wild, and I'm really sorry that was so long. I know that was a really long one. I knew it would be a long one because
No,
there
it's
was
fine.
just so much
No, it
information.
was brilliant. It was brilliant.
I went through so many different articles to
How long
read
did it
through
take you to
this.
put that one together? Weeks?
No, I worked on this one a couple of weeks,
Okay.
including watching the documentary, which
Yeah.
I watched over a day and a half. I started watching it one night late, and good Lord, I got about halfway through the third episode where I was like, I have to go to bed. I need some sleep, and then I picked it up the next morning just to finish it off. And I had my notepad with me as I'm watching it because I had already written a bunch of notes and had things, and then the documentary was filling in others, and I'm like, oh, I got to put this in here. Oh, I got to put this in here. Oh, I've got this. Um, wild, yeah, just a couple of weeks on this one. It was pretty wild.
Nice.
So my voice is cracking now. That takes us to the end of another recording week. As always, you can find more information about us on nerderyandmurdery.com. That's our hub for everything that we talk about. You'll find links to from this episode, plus pictures from this episode, and you'll also find the link to our YouTube page, which Zig so often updates the videos.
Yes, and this one you're going to get a lot of music, and it's the number ones of the indie charts. I'm going to go at least 5 years. I may go 10.
Awesome. Appreciate that.
Sure.
You can also find the link to our merchandise page where if you wish to show off your nerdery murdery fandom, please do consider purchasing something from that. That along with our patrons, you can find the link to our Patreon account. Our patrons help with the costs that are associated with the show as well as does the merchandise. It does keep cost to keep us on the air, to upload our videos, our audio, to stream our audio and everything that's associated with that. So please do consider that. We appreciate each and every one of you.
Please and thank you.
Please and thank you. And last but not least, please don't forget to leave a 5-star review wherever you can. It really helps us and helps others find our content that may be looking for the topics that we discuss. So with that,
I have been Zig with your nerdery.
and I'm Jeffrey with your murdery.
Cue the music.